Commander is a casual format focused on big, explosive plays and social interactions. Its ban list is more about facilitating fun games than it is creating a balanced format, which makes ban announcements especially exciting and contentious. The September 23rd ban list banned 4 cards, and has been quite the topic of debate in the short amount of time since it was announced. So let's get right into it. The first card banned on this announcement was Mana Crypt. This is a 0 mana artifact with the abilities where you can tap it for 2 colorless mana. During your upkeep, you flip a coin. If you lose the flip, Crypt deals 3 damage to you. This drawback is mostly meaningless, however, thanks in part to Commander's higher life total of 40. However, even in formats where players start with 20 life, Mana Crypt has proven itself to be really broken. The extra mana the card gives you on turn 1 can easily snowball into a winning position by letting you slam a card like Lodestone Golem into play on turn 1 that stops your opponent in their tracks. While you do need to do more than play a 1 mana 5 power creature that makes everything more expensive to win a game of Commander, the extra mana is still invaluable. The mana that Mana Crypt gives you on turn 1 can allow it to snowball into even more ramp spells, or play a card like Rhystic Study that will draw you a ton of cards over the course of a game. The end result is that a player who opens Mana Crypt often gets off to a huge head start that either lets them win the game or forces the rest of the table to spend a ton of resources to stop them from winning the game immediately. Either way, Crypt leads to largely negative play patterns and a ton of non-games, and it has essentially no drawback. This is made even worse by the presence of other fast mana in the format like Soul Ring. Commander has enough fast mana to allow players to do things like cast a 6 mana spell on turn 1, but not enough that players will consistently draw into any fast mana. Having more fast mana in the format honestly makes things more inconsistent rather than more consistent. So banning fast mana cards generally keeps everyone on an even playing field. In order to lead to less non-games and to level the playing field of an average game of Commander, the Rules Committee banned Mana Crypt. Now, there is a lot of discussion about these bans, but the next 3 bans are very similar. So before we move to the discussion, we'll go over the reasoning for the cards being banned. The next banned card is Jeweled Lotus. This is a 0 mana artifact with the ability where you can tap and sacrifice a Lotus to add 3 mana of any one color to your mana pool, but you can only spend this mana to cast your commander. Essentially, it's a Black Lotus for your commander only, which is famously one of the most powerful cards ever printed. Players were extremely hyped for the card when it was released all the way back in 2020, and it wasn't all that bad back then. However, it slowly got better and better with time. As more commanders came out, we got more cards like Miirym, Sentinel Worm, Sauron the Dark Lord, and Korvold, Fey Cursed King. The main thing these commanders share is the ability to produce a ton of card advantage in the right scenario, often with very little help. Lotus allowed you to cast these cards far ahead of schedule, often with a card backup to counter any removal, or a spell you can cast to immediately generate value off your commander. This change in tempo allows you to safely play your commander far earlier in the game and start your game plan. This was especially bad with commanders that had inherent protection such as Ward, or even worse, Hexproof, which were almost impossible to interact with. Speaking of Hexproof, Lotus is really good with commanders like Narset Enlightened Master. The way this commander is usually played is by filling your deck with cards that let you take an extra turn after this one. You would play Narset as soon as you could, hopefully with haste, and start swinging and taking extra turns. The deck generally had enough density of extra turn spells that after it attacked once, if Narset didn't die in combat, they would be able to keep taking extra turns until they either found a combo or killed everyone with commander damage. This is, of course, only one example, and not every commander benefited all that much from Lotus. Commanders like Ghalta, Primal Hunger, for example, didn't like the card much at all. However, commanders that had a combination of the right mana cost, value generation, and possible protection effects, Lotus was almost as good as Crypt in a lot of decks. This would lead to the same situation where one player got way ahead on turn 2 and either rode it to victory or demanded the rest of the table pull all their resources together and play an impromptu game of Arch Enemy. Thanks to demanding players to answer a huge threat far too early into a game, Jeweled Lotus was also banned. Finally, the last mana ramp card to be banned on this list was Dockside Extortionist. This is a 1/2 Goblin Pirate for 1 and 1 red. It has the ability where, when it enters the field, you create a treasure token for each artifact and enchantment your opponent controls. These treasure tokens are artifacts you can tap and sacrifice to add 1 mana of any color. Dockside is possibly the most broken card of the 3 we're talking about so far. While it does depend on what cards your opponents have in play, Most decks in Commander will be playing a lot of artifacts and enchantments. Any deck that isn't green will be relying on mana rocks to ramp if they want extra mana, and enchantments like Rhystic Study, Smothering Tithe, and Black Market Connections are considered staples in the format, though some more than others. The point is that in Commander, you can rely on at least one of your opponents to have at least a few artifacts and enchantments in play, meaning that Dockside will probably make about 2 or 3 treasures on the low end. On the high end, it can easily make 10 or more treasures whenever it enters. That may sound like a lot, but it's really not that far-fetched. If every one of your opponents is playing a deck that wants a number of artifacts or enchantments in play, namely things like mana rocks and whatnot, they only have to have 3 each to give you 9 treasures. It can easily be far more than that. While it does actually cost mana to play, no other card in Magic gives you this much mana for this low of a cost. In terms of the difference between the cost of a spell and amount of mana produced, Dockside might have every other Magic card beat. Getting this much mana this early in the game can let you do the exact same thing as cards like Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt. But Dockside can go even further by combining it with other powerful cards like Emil the Blessed or Underworld Breach that can allow you to flicker or recast the Dockside multiple times. It's very easy to get into a loop where you make infinite mana and just win the game on the spot. This means that Dockside not only has the upsides of putting you super far ahead in the early game, but it's honestly amazing at any point in the game. It's always great unless you happen to be top decking with no action, which most Commander decks are built to be able to avoid ever happening. Anytime you draw Extortionists, it's a huge swing, whereas getting a free 2 or 3 mana late in the game is honestly not all that amazing. The thing that really pushed Dockside over the edge in the modern day is the abundance of artifact tokens that decks are making, including treasures and food. Players will often not only have a few artifacts, but have tons of them, meaning that sometimes Dockside, even without much help, gives a player enough mana to win the game that turn. Dockside is always a game-winning card, and the amount of power it represents in almost any board state led to the rules committee to ban the card. Now that we've talked about all 3 of the fast mana cards that were banned, we can talk about how the community feels about these cards getting the axe. This is, all in all, one of the most divisive ban lists ever. The reasons for this are really complicated. The first is that all of these cards are extremely expensive and have been chase mythics in several sets. The cheapest printing of Mana Crypt goes for $70 at the time of writing, Dockside for $30, and Jeweled Lotus for $40. This is on the day of the announcement, and they'll likely continue to fall quite a bit in price. It's early on, so there's not much we can say at this point, but people did lose a lot of money because of the bans. Banning such expensive cards in a casual format has rustled a lot of feathers, mainly because if you're going to ban a card that loses people that much money, you should be sure that's what you want to do. If, for example, pushback caused these cards to be unbanned, it would be a disaster scenario where tons of people lost a ton of money for a change that didn't help the format. A lot of people are upset because their very expensive pieces of cardboard were banned when they didn't feel like they needed to be banned. And if that's your opinion and you have this much skin in the game, yeah, that's gonna feel really bad. This is especially bad for local game stores, whose value in stock just dropped like a rock out of nowhere. Now, this is a larger discussion, but I am of the opinion that the issue here is that chase cards like this should largely not be allowed to get this expensive in the first place. Wizards knew these cards were very sought after and expensive, and their bad reprint policy, more than anything else, is the reason why game pieces this powerful and common in optimal Commander deck lists were allowed to get over $100 a copy in many cases. It's worth pointing out, for example, that Dockside Extortionist was first printed as a rare in a precon and then only reprinted all the way to Mythic and boosters. They were fine with the unreasonable prices for the cards and could have made them more available. And though a ban on an expensive card always hurts, it would hurt a lot less for cards that were not pushing the $100 price tag. A card being expensive should not prevent people running a format from taking appropriate action against those cards, but it is equally important that we restate where the actual fault lies here. The second main point that people have hit on with these cards is that they mostly impact higher power level tables, and at higher power level tables, these kinds of cards are to be expected, so they shouldn't be banned. This is the infamous Rule 0 discussion, the idea that the format is self-regulating, and so cards that would normally need to be banned don't need to be hit in Commander. Now, there are a few issues with this idea. First off, Rule 0 is imprecise at best in terms of creating the games people want. Sure, if you know a play group well, you can find a good power level for you to play at, But if you're trying to find a pickup game with a group of new players, finding what the power level of the table should be is very difficult. The number system that's popular with a lot of players is extremely imprecise. This is the every deck is a 7 conundrum that's spoken about a lot in the community. This means that, even if you say you want to play at medium or lower power level tables, that doesn't mean others at the table won't be playing these broken cards. It's very easy for people to disagree on if a certain card should or shouldn't be allowed at a certain power level, and for unfair cards to pop up even at lower power level tables. Finally, just because you can avoid cards by rule zeroing into a lower power level table doesn't mean a card is healthy for the format. Sure, these cards do only show up at high power level and in CEDH games for the most part, but when they do show up, they're horrible. Unlike other formats of fast mana like Chrome Mox, Dark Ritual, and Mox Opal that have some deck building requirements and downsides, these cards were very playable basically everywhere. They led to a lot of non-games even in higher power level casual EDH, where people did in fact play them quite a bit. Largely, the format is better off with less fast mana in it. However, there is a corner of the format that's been made much worse with these bans: CEDH. Specifically, the banning of Dockside Extortionist makes red much worse as a color in the format. The best decks in the format have access to other cards that allow them to win the game very quickly or control the game until they can win. Red generally gets the short end of the stick at CEDH tables, and Dockside was one of the few ways red decks had to compete with other colors. Dockside's ban essentially removes a ton of deck diversity from the format. This could be fixed by the RC banning cards from those decks to slow them down and balance the colors for the format better. But the rules community has said they don't really want to ban things for CEDH at all. Outside of the flash ban, they only want to ban cards for casual and essentially leave CEDH to rot, which is causing a lot of outcry from that part of the community. Now, the fact that CEDH is better off with Dockside isn't a good enough reason to include such a toxic card in the format overall. But this situation has happened before with the banning of Paradox Engine, and will likely continue. The best solution would be for the RC to care about CEDH when making ban decisions, but as they've made it very clear, they don't want to do that. So people are trying to see if they can create their very own CEDH ban list. This solution also has a lot of issues though. Mainly it means that Commander and CEDH will officially be different formats at that point. What's to stop a new CEDH community from popping up using the original, more popular Commander ban list? Who even gets to decide what the CEDH ban list would be? The RC is only in power because they were grandfathered in. Finding a new group of community members who could run the wing of the format would be very difficult, to put things mildly. It's hard to say what will become of the CEDH community in the wake of these bans, especially as someone on the outside of the community. But it would be really nice if the rules committee could help the community come to some sort of permanent solution. It is worth saying before we go on that we, obviously, have no idea to what degree the RC is looking into a solution like this. Running a format is very difficult, and running a format that's sort of two different formats is even worse. Finally, there's another complaint that could be levied here. The bans didn't go far enough. In the ban announcement, they singled out Sol Ring and said they don't want the card banned, and I have literally no idea why. The card is exactly as bad as Mana Crypt and is ubiquitous, leading to these kinds of unfair and unfun board states even more often. The fact that it's iconic shouldn't be put above making the format more fun to play. The amount of fun generated by people getting to open explosive Sol Ring hands is probably a lot less than the number of games ruined by one player steamrolling with a strong Sol Ring hand. This isn't only one example as well. Lion's Eye Diamond, Mana Vault, Chrome Mox, and Mox Opal, as well as many others, still allow these crazy starts, though to different degrees. Where do you draw the line when it comes to fast mana? The line isn't just blurry right now, it feels completely made up. Jules Lotus is, for as strong as it is, ultimately weaker than a lot of these cards, especially Sol Ring, as it only works with very specific decks and strategies. The reasons for the ban feel very arbitrary when cards that are just as bad or getting there are banned or not banned seemingly without rhyme or reason. Now, no one is going to agree with everything that's been said here, as Commander is a lot of different things to different people. While this is considered a strength of the format, it's honestly a huge weakness as well. The fact that you and the other 3 players at your pod can have such a huge disagreement about how the game should be played without any higher authority providing a solid, enforceable concept of the format and how it should be played leads to a lot of these bad games where people are playing cards at very different power levels that make everyone upset. The CEDH and casual divide is just the most obvious example of conflict that exists everywhere throughout all of the format, and currently has no one-size-fits-all solution. There's a reason why no bans that have ever gone through in the format have ever really been celebrated by the entire community. There's always a sizable chunk of people defending every card that's currently banned or that gets banned. All I can really do is give you my perspective. So here it is. This ban, while hitting problem cards in the format, is applied in a bad way. Not banning fast mana consistently and with a broad, applicable philosophy as to what fast mana is allowed makes anyone who owns these cards feel awful for largely understandable reasons. The cards that were banned are not worse for the format than cards currently unbanned, and losing access to these cards for what feels like arbitrary reasons feels awful. This ban also didn't take into account CEDH at all, which may have been difficult to do, but mediating both casual and CEDH is, as of right now, the responsibility of the rules committee. The ban hit the right cards, but not in the right way. There is one last card that was banned, and it's a lot less interesting than the rest. Nadu, Winged Wisdom. This is a 3/4 legendary bird wizard for 1/1 green and 1 blue. It has flying and the ability where, whenever any one of your creatures becomes the target of a spell or ability, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land, put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, put it into your hand. This ability triggers only twice per turn per creature. We already went over this card when we talked about it getting banned in Modern, and it's banned for the same reason here. With Shuko, an artifact that costs 0 to equip, you can target your creatures infinite times each to get the maximum number of triggers every single turn. If you can turn those triggers into more creatures, you can keep going. With cards like Springheart and Nantuko that make creature tokens whenever a land enters under your control, you can easily draw through your entire deck in a single turn. This is a huge issue for a lot of reasons. Not only is it broken, it also takes forever to resolve. A Nadu combo monopolizes the time in a game, taking over 20-minute turns easily thanks to the sheer number of cards you draw and mana you get access to. This combo even works with cards like Lightning Greaves, which is a staple in the commander format as a way to protect your commander from removal. The card is unfun and too powerful at the same time, made worse by the fact that it can be your commander, allowing you to not only do this every game, but do it multiple times per game. Nadu is a ban that the entire community is actually behind. People were already tired of it in other formats, so seeing it in Commander would have been a huge drag for most players anyway. Bit of an anticlimactic end to the video, but at least there's one card on the ban list that everyone is happy to see gone.